The one that I used to run into all the time when I was in clinics, so I worked in orthotics and prosthetics after athletic training. I used to run into problems with reimbursement all the time. So, this is the type of scenario that would happen. I would have a patient in front of me. They would have an injury that I knew how to fix or how to treat. I would have a prescription from their doctor that agreed with, the treatment that I wanted to provide for them. In my other hand, I would have the brace that I wanted to fit them with, and I wouldn't be able to put that brace on that patient because the insurance company, someone hundreds of miles away, who didn't see either the patient or the prescription, is telling me that they aren't willing to pay for that patient to have that product. So it really felt like they were imposing themselves on what would be otherwise a really seamless patient care visit, by saying, "Nope, I'm sorry, we don't cover that particular thing that you want to provide. You're going to have to use something else that's subpar for that patient because that's what we're willing to pay for." And so that kind of sense of frustration, that disconnect between what I could do and what I was actually able to do for financial reasons for a patient was very jarring to me, and that kind of has stuck with me, and kind of throughout every stage of my career, that's been the thing that I'm trying to fix. It doesn't seem right to me that someone who is, so far from the actual situation can dictate the care that's given.
You know, the podcast we're doing here, it's aimed primarily at practice managers, and I really believe a lot of them are nodding to what you're saying right now, that it's happening at their practices too, and they're feeling this reimbursement delay. So have you found anything that actually works as a fix for this, or are there ways to mitigate this?
I tried a bunch of things throughout my career. So the first thing I tried was, I went and got a PhD in biomechanics, and again, because I was in the bracing, sector, I was gonna do a bunch of studies that showed that these products were effective, and, study the movement changes that it created in the patient, and then I thought, maybe if I publish enough of those studies, I've created a large body of evidence, then the insurance companies surely will have to change their mind, and that was the way to affect change. But it turns
I'm
out that's
sensing
not.
a touch of sarcasm
Yeah.
there.
Turns out that's not really that wasn't helpful, that wasn't what they were interested in, because what they're interested in is kind of a body of evidence that, again, is like 20 years worth of evidence, and one lone researcher kind of shouting your results into the void is not gonna change the decision making of the folks who are holding the purse strings. And so what I did after that, and I think actually does have a little glimmer of hope, is this working with innovators, to actually change the way that their products are designed. And so I think by changing the specifications of the products themselves and making them more realistic for the clinical framework that they have to be used within, that's kind of where the path of hope is. We're looking at small incremental changes from what the current status quo is, instead of these huge disruptive leaps. And I think getting momentum towards change seems to be more important than trying to make a huge jump from 1 to 5.
Interesting. Could you explain this a little bit more to me? The part about innovators. Okay, here's how I understood it initially, and please fill in the gaps, because there's bound to be some. So instead of trying to introduce, let's say, a new type of brace that needs to be approved again or tested again, is it about improving the already approved current types of braces, but just making them slightly better? I'm coming back to your example, or is this something else? What does it look like in practice?
Yeah, so there's 2 things. There's the kind of changing the specifications of the product to fit within the framework, which is the first way that you described it. And then the second thing is to change the framework, right? Change the structure of healthcare in order to be more accepting to innovation. And I think change has to happen on both of those levels, but you have to recognize the amount of inertia that you're going up against, which is huge. And so you have to praise and be excited about just even small incremental steps in the right direction, from both sides. And hopefully soon we'll meet in the middle, and that 20-year gap might be whittled down to a 10-year gap or a 5-year gap. And I would count that as a win.
Okay. So I can understand conceptually improving the products.
Mhm.
You're talking also about improving the overall structure around it. The way the system works, so to speak. So what can be done there?
So, an example would be on the reimbursement side of things, the insurance companies use a tech review process where they look at a new product um, and they determine if there's enough evidence for them to cover it. They use the system for pharmaceutical products the same way that they use it for device products. And that doesn't really work. And as devices are getting more and more advanced, the disconnect is getting worse and worse. So an example is their current standard of care is that you have to have a double blind study. So the patient doesn't know what type of product that they're using. And it's really hard to blind a patient to a device as opposed to a drug because you can just use a placebo pill for a drug. For a device, you still have to have something that you have that patient interact with. So you end up with kind of lower, what they would consider a lower standard of evidence because they're using the same standard across both sectors. What you could do to fix that is they could have a standard for a digital product, a standard for a non-digital product, and a standard for a pharmaceutical product. So just by kind of slightly changing their expectation for the evidence that's generated, they'll find that a lot more evidence is acceptable to them.
I